stop swearing now. Okay, Gavin Sutter, Senior Lecturer in Media Law at the University of London. I believe that's the title you go by.
That is indeed the title I go by, yeah.
Do you want to tell us what it is you do with your working days?
Yep, so I'm a lecturer stroke academic specialist in media law more broadly, which takes in a very wide range of areas that affect performing musicians, performers of any sorts, in terms of ownership of your work, defamation, privacy, and a lot of stuff that affects anybody that works in the public eye. I teach across a wide range of courses in all of these areas across the UK, and a program in Paris on an online program that goes global, and I also do some teaching in Beijing on most years, although this year, of course, at the minute, all of my teaching is currently in the online vein, as all of our teaching has shifted there because of the lockdown and the travel bans and so on. But that's the side of things that I deal with.
So it's fair to say that for those students who are watching this who aren't based in the UK, what you're going to say is still going to be relevant to them. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the reality is that in certainly the creative industries, and once you take anything online, whether that's creativity, whether it's commercial, whether we're talking about, obscenity laws or anything, once you take it online, you are dealing in the global market, and you are potentially dealing with all laws everywhere. There's a mythology that built up in the early days of the internet with people like John Perry Barlow from the Grateful Dead saying, cyberspace is this new area, and nobody can tell you what to do there because it has its own laws, and other such stuff. The reality is the internet is the most over-regulated space there is, because what you've got is absolutely every country trying to apply their laws to the internet. Now, when it comes to something like copyright, which is relatively uncontroversial as opposed to, pornography or anything like that, there's a reasonable position, and it's partly because the industry has been global for so long. They were kind of ahead on the curve on this. And so mostly the principles are broadly the same. And certainly now that you're dealing with big players online, like Google, who own YouTube, and Facebook and so on, you're effectively addressing them. They want to keep themselves right. They're big enough that they can, to a great extent, dictate what's going on. They have a huge influence in how these things operate. So effectively, yes, I mean, the legal position is broadly the same wherever you are.
Well, you bring up the very interesting area of YouTube. So of course, at the moment, we don't have live performances. Venues are shut. An awful lot of people have started performing on YouTube and wanting to grow their YouTube subscribers. So I wanted to ask you a question about performing covers on YouTube. First of all, so sort of coming at this from both angles, how should you go about getting the right permission to perform someone else's work? And how can you find out if somebody else is using your work on YouTube?
Right. Well, dealing with doing a cover version first. Now, there are convoluted ways of doing this, and there's an easy way, and I'll deal with the convolution first.
Okay.
So it's very easy to get caught out here, because most people think, well, I'm doing a show. When I play live, I never have to think about this. The reason you don't have to think about this when you're playing live and you throw in half a dozen covers in your gig is because the royalties and the performing rights and all of that side of it with covers when you play live is dealt with by the actual venue. So the venue should, at least, they should have a PRS license. And that means you can rock up and play any covers there without worrying about it. It's one of the big reasons why tribute bands never have a concern about copyright issues, as long as they only play live and don't record anything for release. So that's quite straightforward. The problem is, of course, it's very easy to think, well, I'm doing a gig in my own home. I'm using the interwebs to put it out there. What's the difference? The difference is, as far as the law is concerned, when you go on to the internet, that is a cover. That is a recording
Yes.
of a song, and therefore you need a covers license for that. Now in the UK, you would approach the MCPS. In the US, there are various alternatives. It's very easy to find out who to ask for the license from if you go online on Google. But once somebody, obviously there are two copyrights in any recorded song. You know, one is the copyright in the song itself, and one is the copyright in a particular recording. So if you're going to sample a song, you're dealing with both of those.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a proper cover version where you just perform somebody else's song, we're only dealing with that one copyright. Now, the rule is that if somebody has already released that song, once it has been recorded and the first commercial release is out there, anybody is entitled to do a cover. You're
Okay.
not, they can't refuse you the right to do a cover. People often look at you know, some of these pop bands who've done terrible covers of classic songs and go, why on earth did they let them? They didn't have any choice. That's the reality. Now, that said, the covers license is quite strict as to what it covers. So you've got to stick to the same basic melody, because that's what the copyright is in the music, and you cannot change the lyrics. So if you want to do a radical reworking of somebody else's
like parody,
work,
maybe, you know, like the Staying Alert, which is such a great piss take of Staying Alive.
yes,
I want to do that. How would I go about
yes,
it?
very much parody would come into that. Now, parodies are, you can do a parody of somebody else's work under the parody exemption for fair use if you're just putting it out there as a joke. Now, if you want to sell it and make money from it, then that's different.
Yeah.
And then you would start to, you'd have to basically get direct copyright permission. So, for example, if you remember when the Smurfs came round again back in the Britpop era, and they wanted to do versions of Wonderwall as Wonder Smurf, and they wanted to do a version of Common People, but change it all to be Smurfs. And the shtick there was they would just find specific words and change them to Smurf. The same as the joke of the Smurfs themselves, really. And both Noel Gallagher and Jarvis Cocker turned them down for that. So they were able to control that. Equally, back in the 90s, when, it's maybe not as good an example to use anymore, but when Rolf Harris released the very successful version of
Stairway to Heaven?
There was Stairway to Heaven. He also did Bohemian Rhapsody. And with Bohemian Rhapsody, he wanted to change the lyric from put a gun against his head, pull the trigger, now he's dead, to put a pencil to his head, tripped and filled him full of lead. And Queen refused to allow him to do that, because they said, no, we don't want our lyrics changed. So, you know, there are limitations under the covers license, but if you live within those limitations, you are entitled to have that automatically, as long as it's previously been released.
I think that what a lot of people might be concerned about is, what is the cost of getting a covers license? Is there cost involved? Especially if maybe you're running a YouTube channel with a few hundred subscribers, each of your videos are maybe getting, you know, less than 1,000 views.
Getting the license is automatic. It's very easy. Just go to the MCPS. That's very straightforward. The payment primarily goes through on the royalty issue.
Okay.
Once you get money coming in.
So if you don't make any money from it, if it stays at a relatively low number of plays, you don't really owe any money.
Effectively, I mean, primarily the remuneration comes from a percentage. They get something like, it used to be 6%. It varies, but they get a specific percentage of any money you make from that release. And then that's, if it does really well, you and they both do really well. If it bombs,
so say it's unlikely, but someone who had millions of views on YouTube and millions of subscribers, and they happen to like one of my tracks and they cover it, then I'm quids in. So I should be really happy for them to cover that. Really, that's the kind of thing you actually want to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's how it goes. Now, you mentioned YouTube. The platform you use is significant because obviously there's a bit of a. Now, I should say with a covers license, you're not obligated to get it before you do the recording. So if you record the song and you ultimately decide, I don't like this, I'm not putting it out anywhere, then you're fine. You do have to have the license even if you don't make any money from it, even if you want to do it for a charity and a charity gets all the money, or you don't make a penny, you still got to have the license if you're going to put it out there.
Okay.
And that applies to any social media. It applies equally to Facebook, to Instagram, to Twitter, to any of them. Now, the clever bit about this is there is a bit of a reach around if you go with YouTube.
Oh, content ID.
Well, it used to be until this year, just a few months ago, if you put up a cover that wasn't properly licensed and the copyright holder challenged that with YouTube, then they did one of either YouTube would basically mute it or they would just pull it altogether. And ultimately, if you were seen as a repeat offender or a significant distributor of effectively a copyright infringing work, then you could have your account pulled. But since Google bought over YouTube, they've been very keen to facilitate YouTube to get as many people on as possible to grow it, because obviously that's how they get the advertising revenue, and to do it in a way that doesn't get them in trouble. So they've worked with the music industry and come up with, as you say, Content ID. Now, what Content ID means is you create your cover version, you put it onto YouTube, and you sign it up. You register with Content ID. And then any artist who owns the copyright can come along to Content ID and can go in, can look at this, and they can pull up a list, including your cover or any other covers of the song that are out there. And they've got three options. They can either pull it all together, they can delete it, they can mute it, or they can tick a box that says, all right, I'm happy with this, stick some advertising on it, and I get a cut of the advertising revenue as the copyright holder in the particular song. And of course, a lot of people are perfectly happy to have other people cover their songs, either because it brings them to a new audience, or they just like, the sharing of their music, or a lot of big artists take the approach of, so what if somebody wants to cover my song, as long as it's not a commercial threat to me. If they start making big money, then I want my cut. But if it's just some kid wants to sing it for fun on YouTube, let them go for it.
They're not going
So
it's a huge hue and cry about it. So basically, if you get a message from YouTube that says you've used someone else's copyright, that's not something to get upset about necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. I mean, you do need to register with the Content ID thing when you upload it, and you will be prompted by YouTube to put that up there. So make sure you do that. Now, the clever science bit of all of this is then, that only works for YouTube. So if you upload your song to Facebook or Instagram, whatever, that won't cover it. However, this is why God invented a clever little thing called the hyperlink and the embedded hyperlink. And what you do is you put your stuff up through YouTube, you then take that embed link and you use that embedded link on your Facebook or wherever else. So Facebook is not hosting or distributing your performance. They're linking to the YouTube performance where you've legitimized it via the Content ID, and that will cover you.
I just want to make it clear to people that if you upload a cover to Facebook and you've uploaded the video to Facebook, not to YouTube, and then you boost that post and you try and get as many views as possible of a cover that you've done where you haven't sought out the copyright, you are breaking the law. This is a bad thing to do.
That's exactly it, Don't put it on Facebook Live. Unless you've got a covers license, don't put it on Facebook Live. Don't perform on Facebook Live other people's material. Don't upload it to Facebook. Do it all via YouTube, linked into the Content ID scheme, and then you're fine. You don't have any of the hassle of getting the covers license. And of course, remember that if you then do decide later on, oh, hang on a minute, you know, I'd quite like to release this because 1 million people have watched it on YouTube. Make sure at that point you get the covers license, because the YouTube scheme only covers distribution on the YouTube platform.
Well,
but as I say, the secret is put it on YouTube. If you want people on Facebook to see it, link to it on YouTube. Don't put it directly on Facebook.
This is what I've been doing. Every week I've been doing something called Corona covers on YouTube, where I do one cover and one original, and I'm actually signed up for Content ID. But a strange thing happened. I got this message when I uploaded a video saying copyright claim, and it turned out not to be the cover. It turned out to be my own song that was being disputed, because I have a publisher who distributes my music for me and collects my royalties from YouTube. So I then had to apply for permission to use something that I had written, and at first I was stunned by this. I was like, this is ridiculous. This is my song. I should be able to take out my phone or my tablet and record my own song. But if you're signed to a publisher, it's best just to mention to them that you're doing this.
Yes. Make sure you do it. And actually filling in and going through that makes a lot of sense. It's a bit like when you go and you do gigs and you're doing, you know, maybe 20 gigs a year, say, and you think, oh, do I really have to fill the PRS form? Oh, 15 minutes wasting time for this form. But you discover by the end of the year, you maybe made 800-900 quid in that year just playing your own music. And you know, that's money for nothing, because you've already been paid for turning up and doing the gigs. And you make, you know, you buy yourself a new guitar, or you buy yourself something that you can use for your career, and then you write that off against tax. And you know, that's why they call it the music business. But you know, absolutely, it's just like signing yourself up against PRS or whatever, because if that gets 1 million hits, then your publisher will do all that collecting the royalties for you, will make sure you get paid because they want to get paid. And it's an awful lot easier than doing it yourself.
Definitely. So another issue, though, because we've talked a bit about copyright. Obviously, copyright is where money comes from in music.
Yes.
And so had asked a very sensible question. When you sign a contract with a publisher or with a record label, you sign away a certain percentage of the copyright, and that's how they make their money, from their percentage of the right. Now you would always have a lawyer look over a contract before you sign it, and any business that would try and pressure you into signing without having someone looking over it first, I would say that would be not a great business to do.
My professional advice as an academic lawyer is, if somebody tries to cajole you into signing a contract and isn't happy about the idea of giving you time to think about it properly and get it looked at by a lawyer, then there's a potential they're not entirely on the level.
Yeah. So at the moment, though, and this question was asked by Siobhan Shields, and what she wanted to know was, media lawyers charge a lot of money, sometimes about £200 an hour, and at the moment when we're losing money, it's hard to pay for one. So where can people go for legal advice at the moment?
Yeah, as a musician, your first port of call is always the Musicians Union. I mean, if you're not a member of the Musicians Union and you're trying to make a career as a musician, what are you doing? You know, it's so important in any profession to be a member of a union, to have that strength as a collective. To have those people who've got your back if you're ever ill or somebody sues you or whatever. But the Musicians Union are very, very good with, both in terms of just their general advice, but they also are very good, very helpful for members at providing initial advice. Obviously, if it then, you know, goes to the case that you're wanting to sue somebody and end up in court or whatever, then you've got to find the money to get a lawyer, and that's a different matter. But to give you a basic steer and keep you right to start with, when you're presented with a contract and you don't want to be the next Chuck Berry or Prince or you know, George Michael or whoever else is being screwed over by record label lawyers, the Musicians Union is the place to go, and they provide a surprising amount of really helpful advice initially for free at that early stage. So
I believe, you know, they'll give the contract an initial squiz over, and they'll write notes on anything on it they think needs changed. If it's very, very involved and there's a lot of work that needs done, at that point you may have to pay an hourly rate. but most things are more straightforward than that. And
most things
they,
are very straightforward. You know, the reality is that this is an industry where, I mean, we all like to think every artist is special and different, but the reality is, in terms of the record label's relationship with you as, to some extent, an employee stroke outside contractor, provider of content from which they can make money, you know, that relationship changes very little no matter who it is. Obviously, it's a much bigger deal. You might have more clout if you're, you know, if you're sort of, because I call him Julian Bieber, Justin Bieber, or somebody like that, who's very big commercially. If he wants to go to a new label and say, he might have more clout with them than somebody who's yet to make a record and is unproven. But that's the same in any industry.
Yeah.
You know, in my own industry, an academic with 20 years of experience, a publishing record and so on, can demand a higher salary than somebody coming straight out with their PhD in their mid-20s.
So if you're not offered the same amount of money as someone who is an established artist who's been touring for 10 years, you are not being screwed over. You're being
absolutely,
be treated in any industry. So I suppose the big question that I should finish with, because this is what everyone's, you know, concerned about at the moment, is revenue has gone down a lot. Live performances aren't happening, so the PRS for those live performances may not be coming in the next year. How can musicians monetize their work in this climate? This is the big question, isn't it?
Oh yes, I mean that's where it really comes down to ingenuity. I mean, there are all sorts of options online. A lot of things like OnlyFans, which, you know, a lot of people are a little bit wary of OnlyFans because it has a reputation for having started with the porn industry. But, you know, I mean, I could give you, I'll not go on at length, but I could give you chapter and verse. Every single major innovation in entertainment technology has actually been largely developed by the porn industry first, including things like Zoom,
porn,
where we're recording this through. But it is a, you know, in all seriousness, OnlyFans is one of a number of platforms that are available where you can record, you can perform. I mean, again, if you're going to do covers and things there, you got to watch the legalities, but you can perform your own music, which is the really interesting bit through that. You can get people to offer you something. Now, it is largely tips rather than, most of these things work on tips rather than subscription, and that's the risk you take. But then
have gone over to a subscription service. You can actually set up what they call a VIP area in Bandcamp, where you
Bandcamp
can ask
are another good one.
To make a monthly subscription, and then from that they maybe get videos that you don't offer anybody else, that are just their personal performances. You know, you give them something a little bit extra for that, and you can set the subscription fee. Patreon, another place where you can get monthly subscriptions.
Those are all good.
People give you a tip in return for a recorded.
And I would say it takes a little bit of keeping an eye on it, a little bit of organization and managing yourself, but it is worth being on a number of these different platforms, because, I mean, we all know when it comes to things like streaming and Spotify and so on, you know, if you write, you know, I mean, I imagine Paul McCartney has probably made about 20p from his back catalogue on Spotify by this point, because they pay so little.
Very pressing, yes.
But the more of these platforms you're on, obviously, the more you can pull in, because at the minute, although I would say Spotify is huge, YouTube is obviously very big. A lot of these other things like OnlyFans and Bandcamp and so on, they're all still largely competing with each other, and there hasn't been a sort of market leader where you could say, oh, I'll make so much money from them, I don't need to worry about the others.
Yes, agreed.
And then it's a matter of organization in terms of keeping all your accounts up to date, because things like, I mean, it's not even a law question, it's a simple matter of media fact that if you're providing whatever the channel it is, whether it's a blog or a YouTube station or whatever, people will, after a certain point in time of you not putting up regular content, will fade away.
Yes,
So you need to
that's
keep
true.
regular stuff going out in each of them. And if you promise something exclusive to your Bandcamp people, don't then give that to your OnlyFans people.
Yes.
But again, it's just a simple matter of being a bit more organized and keeping notes on what goes where and that sort of thing.
Gives
It's
us
also,
something to do with our 2020 diaries, which otherwise would just be
yeah,
a bin at this point. Yeah.
I mean, and it's possibly, worth even thinking about it, that it also gives you the chance to play with different sides of your artistry with different audiences. And if you are led by the audience in each of these formats, you may find you go down different routes. One of them may be more creatively stimulating than another. One of them may be more profitable than another, but it gives you that chance to
Yeah.
play at being a slightly different audience, a slightly different artist, and slightly different audiences,
Yeah.
which can be an advantage too.
Well, there are opportunities. It is quite an exciting time, as well as being quite stressful. And so, Gavin, thank you so much for that wealth of useful
Very
information.
welcome.
So, thanks again for all that you've inputted there. So I'm just going to recap at the end of this video. Don't play covers on Facebook Live. Make sure you fill out the content ID on YouTube, and don't sign contracts with people that don't suggest that you get them looked over by a lawyer. That's
Yep,
important
that's
point.
pretty much it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.